The Khalistan issue has been a long-standing source of tension between India and Canada. The most prominent episode of this tension was back in 1985 when an Air India flight was bombed by Khalistani separatists. All 329 people on board died, including more than 250 Canadians. Now this issue is back in the limelight, with Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau publicly accusing the Indian government of interference in Canada's internal affairs. But this is not the first country that Trudeau has accused of poking its finger in Canada's business. He had famously done that to China before the last Canadian elections, accusing China of meddling in Canadian elections. But soon after his re-election, Justin Trudeau went quiet regarding this Chinese meddling, and the opposition Conservatives in Canada are now accusing him of going soft on China. On Crux Decode, is Trudeau amping up against India in a bid to divert attention from China? Is he throwing Ottawa's relationship with Delhi under the bus only to save its ties with Beijing? Is Beijing the elephant in the room in this recent episode of the Khalistan flare-up? In 2022 at the Bali G20 summit, Justin Trudeau had a public argument with Chinese President Xi Jinping. Xi was seen schooling Trudeau about how to deal with international affairs in a more weighty fashion, particularly when it comes to accusations made against a foreign government. Xi was confronting Trudeau on allegations of Chinese meddling in Canadian politics. Though Trudeau supporters claim that he stood his ground and this episode illustrates China's bullying, it was clear that the world's second most powerful man thought that Trudeau was a lightweight. And this was not the first time either. Back in 2019, during the G20 summit in Osaka, Japan, Trudeau had another public disagreement with Xi Jinping. This one was over the ongoing protests back at that time in Hong Kong, or the Yellow Umbrella protest as it came to be known. Xi Jinping criticized Trudeau for interfering in China's domestic affairs, to which Trudeau responded by emphasizing Canada's commitment to human rights and freedoms. Following the confrontation with Xi Jinping, Justin Trudeau made this issue of Chinese interference a central element of his re-election bid in 2021-22. He also accused China of attempting to exert an oversized influence in Canadian affairs, including allegations of espionage and meddling in domestic politics. Trudeau's government took steps to strengthen Canada's position against Chinese influence and also to protect its national security. Trudeau won the election, and many say a part of the reason why he won was raising this China bogey. Interestingly, after the election, Trudeau went mum on the Chinese allegations. His government did not move, at least publicly, it didn't move against China, either in the trade talks or in other aspects of the bilateral relationship. The orders were clear to try and keep the focus away from Chinese interference, or so-called Chinese interference in Canada's internal affairs. During this period, however, one significant development in the Canada-China relationship was the arrest of Meng Wanzhou, the CFO of Huawei, one of the biggest telecom companies in the world. Meng also happened to be the daughter of the company's founder. Her arrest in pretty dramatic fashion happened in December of 2018 in Vancouver. In retaliation, China detained two Canadian nationals, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, on espionage charges. This led to a prolonged diplomatic standoff between Ottawa and Beijing, and finally, in September of 2021, a deal was struck to release Meng Wanzhou in exchange for the release of the two Canadian detainees, effectively ending this contentious situation. This decision was seen by some as a concession by Canada to China. In fact, Trudeau was roundly criticized for giving in to Chinese bullying. Now, as Canada's political landscape evolves, Justin Trudeau's government appears to be amplifying its stance on the Khalistan issue. It's raising questions about alleged role of Indian agents in the killing of a known Khalistani activist, Hardeep Singh Nijjar. Nijjar was shot dead outside a Gurdwara in Surrey in British Columbia. Trudeau's government is now accusing the Indian government's spy agents of being behind that killing. Trudeau, in fact, chose to rather dramatically make those allegations public by speaking in the Canadian Parliament. But over a week later, there's been no hard evidence provided to back those claims either publicly or in private to Indian officials about the possible involvement of Indian agents. Critics argue that Trudeau may be using the Khalistan issue as a means to divert attention from his rather soft stance when it comes to China, and in particular the Meng Wanzhou case. Trudeau's recent comments and actions related to Khalistan, including his meeting with Sikh leaders and expressions of support for the Sikh community, have drawn the ire of the Indian government. India has been long concerned about Canada providing an open platform for pro-Khalistan activists and has repeatedly urged Canada to take action against these individuals and groups. The Indian government claims it has provided the Canadian side with more than a dozen names of alleged Khalistani activists who are wanted for very serious crimes in India. India is also moving to seize some of the properties of these accused persons and also cancel their PIO and OCI cards through which they could regularly travel to India without a visa. The complex interplay between Canada's foreign policy, particularly vis-a-vis China, the release of Meng Wanzhou, and now its stand on the Khalistan issue makes for a nuanced game of chess. While Trudeau initially accused China of meddling in Canadian politics and took a firm stand on issues like human rights in Tibet and in Hong Kong, his government's handling of the Meng Wanzhou case culminated with her release that seems to suggest a little more conciliatory tone. This shift has raised concerns about potential compromises in Canada's foreign policy. It does reflect a little more of a pragmatic approach, which prioritizes the release of detained Canadians and economic considerations, namely trade with China, over being vocal and criticizing China's actions. Critics also argue that this apparent softening may have implications for Canada's broader position when it comes to human rights. Now, while it's possible that Trudeau's government may be using the Khalistan issue to divert attention from its China-related policies, what is also clear is that using the politics within immigrant communities to shape foreign policy may not be a particularly good idea. Like in the case of India, a minority community of Sikhs, and that too within that a very tiny sliver who are politically well connected, happen to be muddying Canada's overall relationship with India. Similarly, Chinese immigrants and immigrants who came from Taiwan into Canada have been playing a crucial role in the earlier tough stand that Trudeau took against both the Chinese government and the CCP. Canada's approach to these contentious issues will continue to be closely monitored, both by its citizens and the international community, as it tries to balance its relations with both India and China. Trudeau may soon find that having one step in the Chinese boat and another in the Indian catamaran may only result in Canada drowning.